Economic development happens when money comes from outside a region into the region.
It's our job to serve people and to make their lives better.
I spend a lot of time in Garfield County, Enid in particular.
That's probably one of the hardest things, get a good title.
Everyone deserves help.
And he's been very instrumental in trying to make this deal work out.
We're basically self-insuring 100% of the loss.
Now having a new measurement tool to make certain we're ready.
My old friend.
Some girls have even led adoption drives for local rescue agencies.
I want to try to focus on the things out of life that are positive.
City Connections begins right now.
Hello again and welcome to City Connections. I'm Steve Kime, the City of Enid. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, water is a very important subject or topic here in Enid, Oklahoma, and of course Western Oklahoma as well. And either other areas of Oklahoma, water is really that necessity. We have a very special guest today from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, Julie Cunningham. She's the Executive Director, came all the way up from Oklahoma City to visit with us here in the Enid Television Network studios. Julie, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And water is definitely a topic. We've got the Call Lake project or the pipeline project. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But okay, you got a big title, Executive Director. So what is the ED? Or Executive Director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board?
Right, so great question. I've actually been with the agency through all of our programs, which we'll get into. I realize later. The Executive Director position, I run the agency. We have various water quantity and quality monitoring programs, our beneficial use monitoring programs, financial assistance programs. So basically, we monitor and manage and finance infrastructure for the state of Oklahoma long-term water planning.
I've learned this from quite some time ago. As an executive director, you wear many hats.
I do. It's cat herding and everything else.
And I understand about the cat herding, that you mentioned that. Seriously, can you kind of give us just an example of what a so-called typical day would be at OWRB, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board,
Sure.
And especially your role?
Sure. So we have 4 divisions. We hold lots of public meetings. We have actual board meetings once a month. We facilitate our long-term planning, comprehensive water plan. There's many parts of that. So I'm meeting with legislators, meeting with water interest groups, really talking about ways to plan for and manage water for the long term, which we'll certainly get into.
You mentioned the background that you've been with the organization for quite some time. Kind of go back a little bit to the beginning for our audience here in Northwest Oklahoma. Just tell us a little bit about your background and
Sure.
Maybe education. You went to second grade, maybe
Sure.
graduated
Right.
from third grade.
I did, indeed, I did. Graduated of Oklahoma State University
Okay.
in their geography department. So it's the arts and science, basically water or natural resources planning was the emphasis. So I started going to OU, getting some master's credits. Started with the water board in 1994 as a summer intern. Sampling the lakes in Oklahoma. So that's part of our purview is at the water board is we are the lakes agency. So we look at long-term health of the lakes. How are they aging? Are they filling up with nutrients or sediments? That type of thing. So it's the best job I've ever had, I think. I made $6 an hour, if I remember right. But it was a really wonderful way to see the state and see our beautiful lakes and really realize that they are more than just recreation. They're for water supply and flood control and all types of things. So
well, you kind of started with your background basically at Oklahoma State University. So I want to go just a little smidge before that. Where did this interest in Oklahoma or water, lakes, those topics, where did that come from?
Well,
when did that begin?
I think everyone is innately interested in lakes and water. I mean, water is essential for life, obviously. I grew up in Oklahoma City, just south of Lake Hefner, and so my granddad had a sailboat out there.
Okay.
So there were many nights, many days, sitting on the dock, fishing and doing a little sailing, mostly sitting on the dock. Fishing, and then my folks had a place on Lake Texoma as well. So got in my fair share of water skiing and fun girlfriends, and I had many hours of lake time. So I think that's where it all started, and I just happened into this water board role.
When you mentioned Lake Hefner, I have two friends in Oklahoma City that have boats also on Lake Hefner. They love sailing, but they always tell me, said, Steve, the best day or the first and the best days of a boat owner's life is the day he buys it, and then the day he sells it.
Right.
So,
I didn't have to deal with that part of it, just the fun. So.
well, let's get back to the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Primary functions, if there is a particular week or maybe even a segment of the year, is there a quote, primary function that people really associate with the Water Resources Board? I mean, you've covered several topics.
Right. I would say there are several. Certainly the legislative session. This past legislative session, there were many water bills, so there's a lot of interest in water. As you know, the state is very diverse, so the western part of the state is drier. Eastern part is wetter, typically hotter the farther south you go. So I think there are many issues that folks are trying to solve, many different water uses. So we talk about agriculture use, municipal use, oil and gas use. We've heard a lot about oil and gas use. They happen to be about 4% of the entire water use in the state. So I think during the legislative session, we certainly see bills kind of surprise, some of them surprising that that there's so much interest. And then in drought times and in flooding times. So we just experienced that 5-year drought that started in 2011. We administer water rights, so we've got folks calling saying, hey, I'm out of water, or I'm very close to being out of water in my pond or the stream that I pull from. And then we manage those water rights. So water law in Oklahoma is set on first in time, first in right when you're talking about surface water. So if you've got a right that's older than someone else's right, you have an opportunity to use your water, any water remaining in the stream, before someone downstream or upstream can use the water.
With you mentioning that, this may put you on the spot just for a little bit, but when did this all begin to kind of manage the water resources? Because there's individuals that I talk to, and they just can't really grasp the fact that in Enid, Oklahoma, we're getting water 42 miles away in a well, and it's piped to us.
Right.
You know, they turn on the spigot and they figured the water was just down the street or something. And our friends in the eastern part of the state, they have lakes everywhere you turn.
Right.
But it's so
Too
different.
Much water. Right.
Too much water. But here in the western part of the state, it's so different. It's in the ground, it's in wells. But it's all about managing that resources. Was it early statehood, or can you just kind of give us a ballpark figure? When did someone say, you know what, we have got to manage our water resources?
Sure. Right, and that certainly hasn't been the case. And the further east you go, those states do not have water rights administration. So it really, the water board itself was created in 1957. So we've just celebrated our 62nd anniversary, and that was actually key to a key question. So there was a commission that was set up to go around, a group of stakeholders and legislators, go around the state and ask those questions. What are the water issues in the state? And so they came back and said that there were some water quality issues. You know, they didn't know how to manage, for instance, agricultural waste. They would put it from the stockyards right into the rivers, and it would go downstream, and it was fine. So I think at that time they were really looking at water quality, setting up a water quality standards mechanism, and then setting up a water rights administration mechanism. And of course, looking at pending federal policy coming down. When you're managing the entire United States, you talk about a diverse set of water uses and needs and supplies in Oklahoma, but certainly the United States is going to be managed typically much different from the East and West. And we're actually a part of the Western States Water Council. So Oklahoma is one of the 17 western states that manages water in a similar manner when you're talking about water rights administration.
Water is such a significant natural resource for really all states, and it definitely has to be managed. My very special guest today on City Connections is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Sometimes you see the acronym OWRB, and the Executive Director is Julie Cunningham. Julie, I understand, and you referred to this earlier in our visit, about board members. We have a board member that happens to be Ward 5 City Commissioner, Rob Stalling.
Yes.
And I think he's going to serve in a leadership role for you currently or in the near future on the board. On your Water Resources Board, I believe there's 9 members. Now, do they represent from Guyman down to Durant, McAllister to?
Yes.
How does that work? Do
Yes.
They just,
yes.
do they just represent where water's at, or are they
Right.
all over the state?
Well, water is everywhere, and water need is everywhere, right? And so, yes, certainly, Mr. Rob Stallings is our new chairman, newly elected chairman from Enid. So that's we're delighted to have him. He's got a lot of technical knowledge and really knowledge about how water law works and a lot of other water topics. So our board is set up in 9 regions, and so it's geographically set to represent every area of the state and also every water use. So the idea was let's have fair representation when you're talking about the various water uses. So we've got soil conservation represented, industry represented, municipal represented, agriculture represented, the energy sector represented. So it's the idea is to really have a diverse and fair, fairly chopped out, if you will, board that can make decisions based on law. Most of the decisions, all of the decisions that they make are, the water law is pretty prescriptive as far as issuing water rights. So you have to meet certain criteria. You have to have a need for the water. You have to basically own land, as far as groundwater, put it to beneficial use, and if you meet certain criteria, then the board shall, by statute, issue those water rights.
I have a question regarding the board, and you just mentioned the laws, if you will. Now, does Oklahoma have its own laws that the board enforces or operates from, or is there federal laws as well?
Sure. The Clean Water Act is so water quantity in the state is a state issue. Water quality is under the Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act. So those are federal policies to protect the Clean Water Act is put in place to protect the fishable, swimmable aspects of our streams and lakes, so all of our surface water. Groundwater is also regulated by state to state. So we've assessed in this state, we've got certain water quality standards that look at vulnerability, sole source drinking water, for instance, that type of thing.
I was going to ask you that in regard to the Call Lake Pipeline project, it's definitely a topic near and dear to the city of Enid, and really northwestern, north central Oklahoma, because this pipeline, yes, bring water to Enid, but I think it's going to garner a lot more attention from other communities once the water travels 70-some miles. So the question is, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, what role, if any, they have in this Call Lake Pipeline project?
Sure. So the city of Enid has been very forward-thinking, I will say that, and I applaud the leaders and the citizens for actually, passing those rate increases to pay for water infrastructure, planning for future water supply. They've recently done a regional water plan with other cities and other water users, and so as far as the Caw pipeline, the city has their water rights in place, so that's good. They've got rights from Caw Lake, which is very important, very significant. And then we've actually financed about 17 loans through our financing programs to the city of Enid since, I believe, 1995. So we've really been partners. This particular project is a $315 million project, and we are financing basically everything from engineering, land acquisition, construction, all the way through.
It is a significant project, and when I walk by the engineering department, there's a huge map that's laid out on the wall. Just kind of see the progress, and it's just amazing how many different entities make up this pipeline project. It's just not sticking pipe in the ground and letting water flow through for 70-some miles.
Right.
Now, this is important to us here in northwest Oklahoma. Are there other pipeline projects going on in the state? There may be a viewer watching and said, well, I heard maybe Oklahoma City's doing something, or maybe Altus has something going on. Is there other big projects that? Right.
So Oklahoma City actually has a pipeline to the Sardis Lake area. They've got several reservoirs there that they use. They're actually doing a redundant pipe, so they're adding another pipeline across there. City of Altus gets water from a nearby lake and pipes it to their reservoir and to their treatment system. City of Altus also has opened up a a water well field that had been closed several years ago. So in the drought, the whole key is really diversifying those water sources, and that's exactly what Enid is doing. So City of Altus actually pipes water out of these wells to the city.
When I first came to Enid about 6 years ago, it was just amazing to me. And I went to Cleo Springs and to Drummond and some of the other well fields here west of Enid, and I was amazed that I was standing there at a water pump and knowing that water was traveling 40-some miles to Enid to somebody's bathtub. It was just amazing to me, because living in the eastern part of the state for the longest time, you're just thinking you get water from this lake.
You get water from your tap is what most people think. My own mother, I tell this story, my own parents don't even really understand what I do, or that water is managed in the state. So this is good information for the public here.
That's true. Well, let's talk just briefly. We're going to take a short break in a moment, but before that, let's talk about groundwater a little bit. Some of my friends in the eastern part of the state, again, they're so used to Grand Lake and Oologah and Keystone and water skiing, just water everywhere, if you will, and they just can't really grasp this water well 40-some miles away. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about groundwater and really, as a board, how do you, I guess, manage two different climates and two different ways that people are obtaining water?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So groundwater law is completely different, like you said, than surface water. Groundwater is a private property that is owned by the landowner. So the more land you own or have leased to, the more water out of that basin you're entitled to. And so the state statute requires that the water board appropriate groundwater based on a study of the quantity of water, the availability of water in that large reservoir. You think of a groundwater aquifer, a groundwater basin, as it's not necessarily a lake, but it's water in between gravel and sand and rock, and that's the water that we have to quantify, and then we assess how much the number of acres overlying that basin, and then divide out the number of total quantity of water by the number of acres to give you a proportionate share of water that you're entitled to as a landowner, as a water right holder.
It sounds like you're talking like it's an exact science, but it sounds like you're kind of guessing at the same time.
Yep.
So.
Well, any modeling effort, obviously, there's a lot in it, and the actual state statute has some pretty specific criterion that we have to look at. And so we go through the U.S. Geological Survey. We also have our own team of hydrologists. Majority of the staff on the board are hydrologists, geologists, environmental scientists, engineers, and so we've got a lot of really highly technical staff. We use a lot of great contract engineers as well as the Bureau of Reclamation and U.S. Geological Survey. So we try to get it. We really try to get the boundaries correct. We try to get the quantity, the estimates of quantity of water, and then the law actually requires that we do a 20-year update. And we've been plug for funding. We have recently received the past several years gross production tax dollars that have paid for these studies across the state as part of our water plan.
Well, when we come back from a break, we're going to talk a little bit about an aquifer and the water below the ground, if you will, and a little bit about the water plan in the future and what's going on in the state of Oklahoma.
Great.
Well, water is the topic today on City Connections, and my very special guest from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board is Julie Cunningham. And we'll have more with Julie right after this. Thanks for staying with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to City Connections. The topic today, water. And our very special guest is Julie Cunningham. And Julie is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Julie, real quick, your office is Oklahoma City. It's located
3800 North Classen Boulevard.
Okay, so it's not at the Capitol.
Correct.
But it's on Classen, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can people come by and see what's going on at the Oklahoma Water Resources Board?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We encourage call if you've got questions on water, if you've got questions on anything water, we've got a great, fantastic website. We've got all kinds of data out there. If you're interested in water planning, if you're a citizen and interested in conservation, we've got a Water for 2060 conservation program that's online. So you can.
We won't talk about that
Sure.
a little bit later on. Well, I hear a lot of people at the City of Enid talking about, well, we're going to OWRB today for the meetings, so down on North Classen. Well, much of Enid's groundwater comes from an aquifer known as the Cimarron Terrace aquifer. Excuse me. Can you kind of give us a geographical lesson, what it is and
Sure.
how it's formed and
Sure.
location?
So the aquifer is right here, Alfalfa, Woods, Kingfisher counties, right along the Cimarron River. So it basically overlies the Cimarron, and it's a alluvium and terrace aquifer. So it's made up of, if you will, grains and sand, not bedrock, for instance, not a hard rock, but it's basically a storage facility underneath the surface of the water, if you can, or on the stream. If you can imagine that, the water soaks in and stays in the aquifer rather than being, for instance, a hard concrete that would just make the water run off.
So if we drive on I-35 and we go across the bridge north of Guthrie, we go across the Cimarron River, now where would this aquifer be in relationship? Do you just kind of picture in your mind where this aquifer would be?
Sure, it is on the Cimarron, and it runs northwest to southeast.
Okay, but it's just a number of feet that's down in the ground
Sure.
underneath that as well.
Yep.
Well, depending on who you ask, Julie, some people say, well, we're running out of water in the aquifer. It's not replenishing itself. And then some individuals, oh, it's been that way since day one of the universe. Plenty of water. So from a Oklahoma Water Resources Board perspective, tell us about the condition of the Cimarron Terrace
Sure.
aquifer.
Sure, the conditions in any aquifer depend on rainfall, so how much water is actually soaking in. If you've got slow rains versus fast rains that run off, it's not going to have a chance to soak in. It depends on water use, so who's using it, how much water is being pulled out of the aquifer. There's also certain areas that are gaining, they call it gaining and losing streams, and so you'll have portions of an aquifer that will be higher than the water table itself, and so the aquifer will drain out of the aquifer into a river, for instance. These alluvium terrace aquifers are more sensitive to drought and use. They fill up and drain much more quickly. If you can imagine water going through sand and gravel versus going through a very confined bedrock layer that's thousands of feet deep, and that is a larger aquifer. It's not a huge aquifer, but it does respond more quickly to drought conditions and flooding conditions. And so if you've got an extended 5-year drought like we experienced recently, it's in everybody's memory, hopefully, you certainly are going to see the aquifer, just the base flow itself, draining and flowing out of the aquifer and experiencing those drier times.
How many aquifers, if this is a fair question, that we have in the state of Oklahoma? This one is near and dear to us because it's close to Enid and so forth. Are there aquifers in the eastern part of the state?
Yes,
southern part of the state?
yes. So there's 23 major aquifers. We call them major
23,
aquifers.
okay.
Those are the defined large aquifers. We've got them mapped and defined. We are systematically going through the state and completing the studies to quantify the availability of water, the quantity of water available in those. We're actually just now going to the northeastern part of the state, the Ruby-Doo aquifer. It's a large aquifer, and then the Boone aquifer, which sits on top of that. So it's a confining layer, two aquifers kind of stacked on top of each other, if you will. And so we're doing studies. You wouldn't think that groundwater would be used in the northeastern part of the state.
Not at all.
But really, I think the whole key in this is what we kind of makes sense is really diversifying. We kind of preach this diversifying your water portfolio, if you will. So in drought times and flood times, and we haven't touched on water storage, but those storage reservoirs, those dams, are very important in the state. Our lakes are very important. like I said, I grew up swimming and fishing and water skiing, but the purpose of those is for drinking water. They're appropriated for drinking water, as well as flood control to hold back those flood waters, and sediment sinks, if you will.
I don't know if this is a true statement or not, but when I first came to the city of Enid, had a gentleman in Public Works. It was really snowing this particular February. I mean, it was really snowing. We had like 12-inch snow. It was quite a snowstorm. And he goes, Steve, 6 months from now, we'll see this water again. And he was just referring to that the snow is going to melt, go into the aquifer, and maybe June, July, you'd see it again.
Right, if you had a marker.
Is there kind of an average? Does it take 3 months, 6 months? Do we know? You said you have all the technical expertise, so
Sure.
I know people are studying that.
Right.
So if it rains in January, is it 6 months time that water gets to the aquifer?
Right, and that is a rhetorical question, right? So I don't know for sure, but I will say that's one of the factors that we calculate, is that porosity, and that how quickly does water move through those rock formations, and which way does it move. You know, there'll be underlying, there'll be an outcrop of a rock outcrop, for instance, of an aquifer, and it'll be, you know, kind of diving underground a certain direction,
Sure.
and so the water is going to follow that. And so there are many variables. When you get into, for instance, our Buckle-Simpson aquifer, we've done much study because of state legislation and state dollars, because it is a sole source aquifer, drinking water aquifer. And that particular situation, there are many fractures in the aquifer, and so the water, you predictably think it would go one way. Well, if you've got the bedrock fractured, then it's gonna run another way. So those are the types of issues that we run into. Not a lot of the aquifers are homogeneous, although a more riverine system with more gravel is probably going to be more homogeneous, more predictable, if you will, than some other types of aquifers.
Julie, every once in a while in the media you hear the term nitrates when they talk about groundwater. Can you just kind of share with us, what are they talking about?
Sure. Nitrates can be naturally occurring. They can also come into the aquifer from fertilizers, so they're a key element, obviously, in fertilizers, in agriculture production, and other sources. And so anytime that there are fertilizers put on the ground, those can certainly, obviously with the water, soak into the groundwater.
I recall having a visit with former Governor Mary Fallin about the long-range comprehensive plan. It was called 2060. I'm confident that you have the title for what the plan is all about. What is that plan, the title, basically,
Sure.
and then really what is it all about?
Sure. So the Oklahoma Water Resources Board is charged by statute to do a statewide comprehensive plan and redo that, update that every 10 years by law. And so we look at basically start out with basics, looking at supply and demand from every use sector for the next 50 years. So it's a 50-year, looking out 50 years, 50-year plan, what are the projected supply, demand, and then those gaps. So that's what we really are concentrating on, is what are the gaps, where are the growth areas in the state. Obviously, Enid wants to grow, every community wants to grow, and you certainly have to plan for water. And so that's the kind of the technical side of the plan, and then there's also a policy side. So looking at those supply, demand, gaps, options. We do a regional, we've got a 13 region study that looked at all the different regions in the state and looked at, for instance, water rights that are already on the books, that already exist, and what's the capacity to issue more water rights and use more water. And then really looking at the alternate water supplies to fill in, okay, if we have a gap here, if we know that supply is going to be less than demand, projected in 50 years, then where else can we get our water? So it really gets communities, it's a tool for communities to start planning and start looking at those other water sources, and including sharing and regional planning between communities, providing backup water sources for various communities, etc. And then the other piece of the water plan is the public policy piece. So that was a 3-year process where we went around the state, again, just as the water board itself was created, went around the state, held 42 public meetings. We held meetings right here in Enid. We held regional meetings. We held, eventually consumed into a town hall meeting for the state. And we took those recommendations that we heard all over the state, put those into 8 priority recommendations, and then went to the legislature to try to get some of those funded. And so we've got some really good response. Our state legislature has always been forward-thinking when it comes to water planning. You look at all the Corps of Engineers reservoirs that were built for flood control and water supply, and I think we've always had a really proactive legislature and congressional delegation and city leaders that are thinking long-term on our water needs in the state.
And time like today is when we appreciate the individuals 20, 30, 50 years ago that got into this forward-thinking mode.
Right.
And every once in a while I'll run into an individual that will say, well, see, way back in the 80s here in Enid, they were excuse me, doing the forward thinking that we're going to need this water. And so either the Drummond Field was developed, and that was back in the 80s, and here we are, 40 some years later, and we're so thankful that that area was developed. And the same way with Call Lake. You mentioned about being affiliated in the western part of the United States, and then you used the term regional a little bit ago. This prompts this question with Call Lake, since that's important to us. A lot of the rain from southeastern Kansas works its way to Call Lake. I mean, it can be dry as all get out in Oklahoma, but if eastern part of Kansas is getting a lot of rain, it's going to fill up Call Lake or keep that water level up there. How often do you interact with the Kansas bureaus, if you will, and the Arkansas and Texas as well?
Right, and most people wouldn't, once again, water management, water resources management, most people don't know that we have interstate compacts. So there's compact commissions way back when, which were set up to address just those interstate water issues. And so I'm a commissioner. Several Oklahoma commissioners that participate in the Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas River Compact Commission, the Arkansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas River Compact Commission, and then the Red River Compact Commission, which is Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana. And then we've got the Canadian River Compact, which is Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And so we meet once a year, talk about water needs, especially with Kansas. We talk also about water quality needs. And so how can we spend the dollars appropriately to keep those nutrients, to keep those nitrates out of the watershed and onto the land, and conserve that sediment, leave the sediment on the land as opposed to being in our lakes and filling in the lakes and all the infrastructure that we've paid for. We really try to help manage those lakes and make those last. As you may have heard on the news, many of them are well designed beyond their design life now. So.
Let's play the comparison game real quick and give you a chance to kind of showcase your work. So let's go 20, 25, 30 years back. How are we doing in regard to really managing our resources, the water quality and just water itself?
Well, I think it's water is certainly on folks' mind. I think a long-term drought or this flooding, for instance, brings it back up when we've got all kinds of other things that we need to take care of in this state to make our state a top 10 state, right? Water is kind of in the background, but as far as really educating the public and having the public be more aware of water, I think they are. I think we're seeing a lot more regional water planning activities going on. So we're trying to work with the economic development entities around the state to say, listen, let's make water, let's really sell the state on its water resources, and the whole concept of having those foundational, foundational science, for instance, quantifying the amount of water that we have, having our dam inventory. So our reservoirs, we've got the second highest number of reservoirs for under state authority reservoirs in the country. And so we've done a good job. We've got these Natural Resource Conservation Service built 2,300 reservoirs in the state to hold back water way back when, to hold back water in flood times and hold back that sediment. And so I think we've done a good job in planning. I think the tough thing for us is we've got a number of very small water systems, and they are aging. The populations in some of these smaller towns are decreasing. So water, when you talk about raising water bills and that kind of thing, it's really tough to run those systems. And so I think we need to be very much more creative in kind of addressing the low-hanging fruit, if you will, of how to create more water, how to get more water, things like leak detection and saving our identifying those leaks in our water system along the pipes. Some communities are leaking as much as 30% of water. So you source your water, you treat your water, you deliver the water, and 30% of it is going back into the ground because of leaking pipes. So I think there are certain things that we can certainly do and be more proactive at doing as far as planning and using our water infrastructure more wisely. But it's really a matter of getting folks' attention and really understanding that water is foundational and the water infrastructure is absolutely critical for the state.
Our visit today has really been enlightening to me, and then you talk about several familiar topics, because I hear this within the walls of City of Enid. We have some pipes that have been in the ground for 70 plus years,
right.
And you kind of expect some of those leaks from time to time, and you're doing your best to keep the infrastructure up and running. Well, we're at the end of our visit today, and again, I really appreciate your time. This has really been educational for me, and I know for our viewers as well. Just kind of a closeout question. What would you offer to our viewers if they need information, they need to visit with you, they need to learn more about the Water Resources Board, anything really what you're involved in? How would you address that? What would you say?
Well, certainly call our office anytime. Come by. We'd be happy to visit. Our website, like I said, our website has all kinds of water information. You would learn a lot more about. Of course, I can sit here and talk water all day, but things like floodplain management and dam safety and water infrastructure financing, and those exciting topics for me, and really neighborhood conservation. And it really does start, and I think every citizen can certainly take something away from it. Be cognizant of the water that you're using, and it stresses out the system a lot less, and it prevents a community from having to go find more water and build more infrastructure capacity if everybody conserves. And so to keep your water bill down, it behooves all of us, just like our electric bills. It behooves all of us to really be cognizant of that conservation. But come by. We've also got a Oklahoma, it's called Gov Delivery subscription, so you can actually sign up and get updates about water topics in your email. We've got a Twitter account. You can go online and see that. We've got all kinds of water mapping projects and mapping layers and data, and you can certainly geek out if you're that type like I am.
It almost sounds like you can spend the day, and again, you're on North Classen. What's the number again?
Yes, 3800 North Classen.
3800 North Classen in Oklahoma City. Julie Cunningham, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This is not a statement. This has been very enlightening. It's been very educational. We try to provide some educational interviews from time to time. This has really been good. Thank you for sharing
thank you,
with
Steve.
us.
Appreciate it.
And again, the topic, water. And Julie Cunningham has done a great job talking about all aspects of water right here at the Enid Television Network. And again, she's as the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. Thank you for watching City Connections. Until next time, make it a great day and conserve that water. Right, Julie?
Yes, yes.